Okay, finally, it wouldn't let me on. My Wi-Fi has been acting up. Okay, let's see. I had to rearrange some things today on my teaching. I had to move my Algebra 1 advanced class to later today because some things came up. Looks like that's pretty clear now. I was having Wi-Fi trouble before. This is Algebra 2. Today's April 30th, last day of April. I love the last days of the month. I get paid. We are doing quadratic equations again today. The last lesson we did was really easy, where you had to solve for quadratic equations using the square root. And today we're going to be factoring. So you're going to have to go back and remember how to factor. We're doing two lessons, actually. We're doing solving by the zero product property, which will lead us into solving by factoring, because it's like the first step in solving. The zero product property is the first step. Actually, factoring is the first step, and then you use the zero product property to get your answers. Let's see if anyone's going to join. There's probably not going to be anybody joining me. I'll be all by myself again. Lori, if you're watching this, then you can laugh at that again. Oh man, it looks like it's blurry again. Maybe if I move the camera away from me, because I have some type of magnetic energy that makes things go haywire. Let's see if that cleared it up any. Alright, I think that may be a little bit clearer. We can get started. Okay, so for Algebra 2, quadratic equations, we have two goals: to solve quadratic equations using the zero product property. And then that's going to lead us into our goal number 2, solving quadratic equations by factoring. So let's look first of all at the zero product property. Think about those words. Zero product. That means product indicates multiplication. So what we're looking at is if you multiply two things together, let's just use A and B to represent numbers that you're multiplying together, and your answer is 0, then you know one of those numbers had to be 0, because the only way to get 0 for an answer when you're multiplying is for one of the factors to be 0. So that's what the zero product property tells us. If A times B equals 0, then we know A equals 0 or B equals 0. So if you'll look at example 1, it says solve for t, and our problem is t plus 2 times t minus 9 equals 0. Okay, so each parenthesis represents a factor, just like A and B up here. So if t plus 2 has to equal 0, or t minus 9 has to equal 0, then you just take those parentheses and set them equal to 0 and solve it. So you would say t plus 2 equals 0. And that's just an easy one-step equation that you solve now by subtracting 2. And you get t equals 0 minus 2, which is negative 2. And that is one of your answers. And then in the second parentheses, you have t minus 9 equals 0. So you have to also set this factor equal to 0. T minus 9 equals 0. Then you would add your 9 to the other side, and you get t equals 9. And that's all there is to that. T equals -2 or t equals 9. That makes sense because if you plug your -2 into this parentheses, what is -2 plus 2? 0. And so that means that parentheses would equal 0, which would make sense according to our zero product property. Also, if you plugged this 9 into t, what's 9 minus 9? 0. See, it all makes sense. All right, let's move on to example 2. 3t plus 6 times t minus 5 equals 0. So once again, I know that 3t plus 6 has to equal 0, or t minus 5 has to equal 0. And then I just take each equation and solve it. So let's start with this equation. We have this plus 6, so we have to move the 6 to the other side by subtracting it. You actually subtract it on both sides. I just don't really like showing that over there. Just subtract your 6 from 0, and you are left with 3t equals -6. But now you still have this 3 to divide by, because 3t equals -6, which means when you divide, t will equal -2. Okay, so -2 is one of your answers. Now, if you'll look, that only makes sense. If you plug your -2 in right here to this t, what is 3 times -2? -6, right? And what is -6 plus 6? 0. So see, that answer makes sense for that parentheses, because we're trying to show what will make each parentheses equal 0. So over here, we've got t minus 5 equals 0, so we're just going to add 5 to the other side, and you get t equals 0 plus 5, which is 5. So those are my two answers, either -2 or 5. All right, look at example 3. It's written a little bit differently. You only have one parentheses. It says solve for n. N times 2n minus 1 equals 0. But we've still got two factors here. N is a factor, and then this whole parentheses is a factor. So when n times this whole parentheses equals 0, then that means one of the factors has to equal 0. This n, like I said, is a factor. So if you have n or any number on the outside, you set it equal to 0. So you get n equals 0, and there's no solving to that. That's already one of your answers. In other words, if you have a variable on the outside of your parentheses, 0 is always going to be one of the answers. All right, now take your parentheses 2n minus 1 and set it equal to 0, and then just solve that. So we're going to add 1 to 0, and then you have 2n equals 0 plus 1, which is 1. And I think I'm out of room. Can y'all still see this? I think you can still see it. I'm going to slide it up just a little bit. And then keep solving and divide by 2. And when you divide by 2, you get 1 over 2, 1/2. So 1/2 is your other answer. 0 and 1/2. When you enter your answers on the IXL and the box on the IXL, they're going to tell you to enter your answers and then separate them by commas. So you'll put like 0, 1/2, or on this one, -2, 5. You're just going to put your two answers in, separated by a comma. All right. We are moving on. We still have one more that we're going to do that is already in the correct form using the zero product property. Let me make sure that that's in the view. Yeah, y'all can see that. I hear my dog in the background. My dog has a scratching problem. She just scratches constantly. Honey, stop. Okay. Example 4. Solve for y. 8y plus 1 times 5y minus 8 equals 0. When you see this, you should recognize you've got your two parentheses, your two factors. It's set equal to 0, so you're going to solve it by the zero product property. That's how you recognize it. It has to be 0 over here on the right side. And then you have to have your factors over here. It has to be in factored form on the left side, because we're going to swap up in a minute. I'm going to show you how to tell the difference in the problems that you have to factor first. All right, so we're going to take 8y plus 1 and set it equal to 0. We're going to take 5y minus 8 and set it equal to 0 and solve both of those equations. So subtract your 1 from 0, and you're going to get 8y equals negative 1. And then when you divide, you can't actually divide, and they don't want you to put decimals, I don't believe, on IXL, so they just want you to leave it in fraction form. So you're just going to put the 8 up under the negative 1. So that's going to be y equals negative 1 over 8. And then on the second equation, you're going to add 8 to 0. And you're left with 5y equals 0 plus 8, which is 8. And then divide by 5. And when you divide by 5 again, you're just going to write 8 divided by 5. So those are your two answers. Negative 1/8 and positive 8/5. All right, all 4 of the examples that we've done so far have started out in factored form. You've got your two parentheses side by side. We had that one example that had the variable in front of the parentheses. Those are all factored already. And you've got your 0 on the right side. So whenever you have your 0 on the right side and everything's factored, you just do what we've been doing with the zero product property. If you'll look at examples 5, 6, and 7, they're not like that. They're not in factored form because you have all these pluses, and there's nothing factored. It's just like a regular polynomial. So that indicates to you, or it should indicate to you, that you need to factor those because we want to get them in this form so we can use the zero product property. So you have to think back of the factoring patterns that we learned back when we did all the factoring. That was, I believe, y'all's first lessons after we got out of school. It was all the different factoring that we had to do. And this is where you're going to use it. So look at 10r to the second plus 7r equals 0. So what makes these problems different than the factoring problems we've already done? When you had factoring problems, you did not have the equations. You did not have the equal 0. You just had this part of it. So you learned how to factor. Well, now they're equations. And when they're equations with an equal sign, you now have to find answers like we did up here. So your first step on these is to factor. And once you factor, it's just like examples 1 through 4, where you use your zero product property. Okay, so look at these two. What you've got to do is be able to recognize, based on the way the problem looks, how you are supposed to factor that. Well, there's 2 terms. There's not 3. So you can't do the, remember the slide, factor, divide, bottoms up. You can't do that with this one because there's only 2 terms. There's not a difference of 2 perfect squares, but what there is a GCF, because when you look at 10r squared plus 7r, you should immediately think, hey, I've got an r in both terms. I need to factor that out or pull it out. So I'm going to pull my r out front, and when you pull your r out front and divide, inside your parentheses, you're left with 10r plus 7, and then equals 0. So don't forget how to factor with your GCF. You pulled the common factor out front, did the distributive property backwards, and now it's in the correct form, so you can solve these using the zero product property. take the r on the outside, and you set it equal to 0. Now I'm about to make sure you have noticed, hopefully on examples 1 through 4, you noticed maybe a little pattern on how to get the answers from the parentheses without doing all the work to solving. And let's look back up here and see if, and I'm going to go back over examples 1 through 4 just to see if you can see the shortcut way of how to get your answer. So you can save time and space on solving. Look at these two. 8y plus 1. Look at my answer. It was negative 1 over 8. Look at this parentheses. 5y minus 8. And then look at the answer. It was positive 8 over 5. So what I always tell my students to think of it as is the opposite sign of the back over the front. Your answer is always going from the parentheses to the answer. It's always going to be the opposite of the back over the front. That's a cute little saying. The opposite of the back over the front. The opposite of the back over the front. So see, the opposite of the back over the front. Positive 8 over 5. So let's look back over here. Look at example 1. T plus 2 and the answer is negative 2. The opposite of the back over the front. In this case, the front's 1. So negative 2 over 1, which is negative 2. The opposite of the back over the front. So positive 9 over 1, which is 9. Example 2. The opposite of the back over the front. So that's going to be negative 6 over 3, which is negative 2. The opposite of the back over the front. Positive 5 over 1. You got it? See this one, example 3? Look in the parentheses. The opposite of the back over the front. Positive 1 over 2. And then this n, remember variables on the outside always have 0 in the answer. So let's look back at this. I had somebody joining me. Who was it? I was excited for a minute because I had some people watching. But I think they left. Man. Now it's just me again. Okay. So back to this. We factored out our r. We were left with 10r plus 7 equals 0. Here's r equals 0. And now remember how to get your answer without actually solving the steps is the opposite of the back over the front. That's fun to say. Y'all say it. The opposite of the back over the front. If Lori watches this, I'm giving her lots of reason to laugh. Okay. Example 6. Again, we're going to solve for x. So our problem is x squared plus 15x equals 0. Now think about that for a minute. We have to factor it first because it's not in factored form. Look at your two terms. See if there's a GCF. There is a GCF. It's x. So we're going to pull x out front. And when you pull an x out of each one of these, by division, you're left with x plus 15 equals 0. So we factored it. Now you have a variable outside the parentheses. That means 0 is one of your answers. X equals 0. And then your other x is going to equal the opposite of the back over the front. And it's 15 over 1, which is just negative 15. Now, if you don't like the shortcut way, if you don't like doing the opposite of the back over the front, do how I showed you in examples 1 through 4. And just write each parentheses down, set it equal to 0, and solve it. All right, look at example 7. What does example 7 look like? Example 7 has 3 terms. What's the word for 3 terms? A polynomial with 3 terms? That's right. It's a trinomial. Okay, so remember with a trinomial, you want to look first to see if there's a GCF. There's not. You should notice that there's no number in front of my quadratic term, the n squared term. So you're ready to go ahead and factor it into your 2 parentheses the easy way. Just don't forget your equals 0. So you're looking, first of all, we got to split our n's apart. So n times n. And then you're looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to give you 5 that will add up to be 6. It's going to be 5 and 1. So plus 5 plus 1. Now once you factored it, you got to solve for n. So n is going to equal the opposite of the back over the front. And n equals the opposite of the back over the front. And that is it. My dog is snoring now. She is crazy. All right. I hope eventually somebody watches this. I hope my Algebra 2 students have not stopped working. I'm depending on y'all to do what you're supposed to do and learn this material. Keep working. It's important. Let's move on to example 8. Let me see if that's straight. I don't like writing on crooked paper. All right, there we go. I think that's straight. Example 8. Oh boy, we're getting into the harder ones now. The reason I know that is because you have a number in front of your quadratic term. That means we got to go back and remember how to do the slide, factor, divide, bottoms up method. Which that's actually fun, I think. I think it's fun. All this stuff's fun. Isn't Algebra 2 fun? Okay, here we go. 17, we're going to solve for h. 17h squared plus 15h minus 2 equals 0. So we have 3 terms. It's not factored, so we've got to factor it. You have to remember how to factor the 3 terms. We can't do it like we did example 7 because you have a number in front right here. So we've got to do the slide, factor, divide, bottoms up method. Okay, so when we do that, we've got to pick up the 17. We move it to the end where the negative 2 is and multiply. And that leaves us with h squared plus 15h and then minus 2 times 17 is minus 34 equals 0. And now we factor. Okay, so on this trinomial, when we factor it, we're going to split up our h's. You're trying to get a negative 34 when you multiply and a positive 15 when you add. So that's going to be a positive 17 times a negative 2. Now we divide by the number that was in front of the trinomial to begin with. So we're going to divide by 17. And that gives us h plus 1. Because 17 divided by 17 is 1. 2 over 17 will not simplify, so it's bottoms up. And the 17 goes in front of the h in that parentheses. So 17h minus 2. Now remember, that's the factored part. Now we have to actually solve to get our answer for h. When you solve, remember, I'm going to have h equals the opposite of the back over the front. So that's going to be negative 1 over 1, which is just negative 1. And then on this one, h is going to equal the opposite of the back over the front, 2 over 17. 2 divided by 17. And that is your answer. All right, moving right along. Example 9. I wish y'all were out there watching this now so I could tell you to try that and see what you get. but no one's there, so I'll go on. 3w to the second minus 5w minus 8 equals 0, and we're supposed to solve for w. Okay, so there's a number in front. Oh, honey is snoring. It's so funny. Okay, so I'm going to multiply 3 times 8, and I get w to the second minus 5w minus 3 times 8, because you slide the 3 down to the 8 and multiply. That'll be 24. Keep bringing down your equal 0. Factor the trinomial. That's going to be, this is good review for the factoring part. I like algebra problems when they go back and use other things you've learned. Okay, so we're trying to multiply two numbers together to get negative 24. And we are trying to add them to get positive 5. So think of all the factors of 24. 8 times 3 is 24, right? And then you can add 8 and 3 as long as one of them is negative to get negative 5. So it'll be minus 8 and plus 3. Then we have to divide by this 3 that was in front of the trinomial. So divide by 3. And you end up, you have to do bottoms up on this one. So 3w minus 8. And then the 3 over 3 simplifies to 1, and you get w plus 1. And then I have my answers. It's going to be too crowded to write my answers right here. So I'm going to come over here in this space to write my answers. Oh, I forgot to bring my equal 0 down. Don't forget that. It's very important. It makes it completely a different problem. So now we're solving for w. So remember, w is going to equal the opposite of the back over the front. So w is going to equal positive 8 over 3. And then w is going to equal negative 1 over 1, which is just negative 1. And those are my two answers. Moving on to example 10. And our last one, thank goodness, example 10. Solve x squared minus 16 equals 0. This is a different problem, a different type of problem. It's not a trinomial, and there is no GCF. So reach down into that brain of yours and remember what to do when you have the difference of two perfect squares. The difference of two perfect squares. Remember, you're going to have two parentheses. Bring down your equal 0. And now you're looking for square roots of both of these, and then you're going to have a plus and a minus. Remember doing that? You're going to have x, and then you take the square root of 16, which is 4, and make it x plus 4. And then make your other parentheses x minus 4. And then just solve both of those. If x plus 4 equals 0, that means x equals negative 4. And on this one, opposite of the back over the front, x equals positive 4. And that, ladies and germs, is our lesson for today. That was actually 2 lessons, and you're going to have 2 assignments, 2 IXL lessons. Your assignment is IXL Algebra 2. You need to do J7 and get a SMART score of 80. That's the zero product property, the first one. SMART score of 80. Because you now know the shortcut way of getting your answers, which is the opposite of the back over the front. If I were you, I would try to do this one up to 100. You don't have to, but you know, you get extra points if you get up to 100, and this one's going to be easy. J8, toward the end, you get a lot of these where you have to do the slide, divide, bottoms up method. So because it's a little bit time consuming, I'm going to only make you go to a 74 on your SMART score. So smart score of 80 on J7, smart score of 74 on J8. And that's it. Y'all have a great weekend. Do all your work. Don't forget your quiz. And I will see you next week. Actually, I'm going to be calling to check up on some people tomorrow. So y'all take care. Bye.